12 elite military working dogs simultaneously disobeyed orders, just to kneel before a woman, the military records say, died 3 years ago. The roar of CH-47 Chinook engines tore through the suffocating tension blanketing Firebase Sentinel. Desert sand spiraled upward in violent cyclones, lashing against the faces of soldiers scrambling toward the makeshift airstrip with the desperate urgency of men who knew death was counting down behind them. "Move! Move! We have 45 minutes before the shelling starts." Master Sergeant Collins stood at the epicenter of chaos, his weathered hands wrapped around Rex's leash with white-knuckle intensity. The Belgian Malinois held position beside him, ears rotating like satellite dishes tracking invisible threats. Behind them, 11 more military working dogs formed a disciplined line across the dusty tarmac, their handlers struggling to maintain formation against the helicopter's downdraft. 3 years, 3 tours, 97 successful operations. Collins had never seen his K9 unit break protocol, not once. Then he saw her. A small woman stood 20 meters away, half hidden behind a stack of ammunition crates, dust-covered jacket, faded medical backpack hanging from one shoulder, eyes cast downward like she was trying to disappear into the sand itself. She was attempting to edge closer to the evacuation line, her movements hesitant, almost apologetic. "Hey!" Collins's voice cut through the engine noise like a blade. "Civilian, step aside. You're not priority." The woman stopped, said nothing, made no protest. Lieutenant Hayes materialized beside Collins, his freshly pressed uniform somehow immaculate despite the surrounding chaos. The young officer's lip curled as he surveyed the interloper. "Medical volunteer, is it? Did you think this was some kind of adventure tourism?" Laughter rippled through the nearby soldiers, sharp, dismissive, the sound of men who had earned their place in hell and resented anyone who hadn't paid the same price. The woman retreated a single step, still silent, still small, but Rex jerked against his leash, hard, then Shadow did the same, then Ghost. 12 military working dogs, animals trained to ignore everything except their handlers' commands, simultaneously oriented toward the stranger, ears erect, nostrils flaring, something ancient and instinctive flickering behind their amber eyes. Collins frowned. What the? In the next 20 minutes, Firebase Sentinel would witness something no training manual could explain. 12 dogs bred for absolute obedience would refuse every command given, and the woman they had dismissed as worthless baggage would bring them all to their knees. The woman, her volunteer badge identified her as Elena Martinez, lowered herself onto an empty ammunition crate at the far edge of the airstrip. She moved with an economy of motion that seemed almost rehearsed, settling into position with her back against a concrete barrier, her eyes maintaining a casual sweep of her surroundings that could have been mistaken for nervousness. Could have been. Corporal Maria Diaz noticed her first. The only female handler in the K9 unit, Diaz had fought tooth and nail for every scrap of respect she'd earned in this male-dominated world. The sight of another woman, a civilian no less, trying to hitch a ride on their extraction made something cold twist in her stomach. "Collins," she called out, jerking her chin toward Elena, "maybe she's got dog treats in that bag. That's why they're acting up." The joke landed exactly as intended. More laughter, more contempt. Elena's expression didn't change. She simply adjusted her position on the crate, her weight shifting in a subtle movement that brought her feet flat on the ground, knees bent at a precise angle. Anyone watching closely might have recognized it as a combat-ready stance, a position that allowed for explosive movement in any direction. No one was watching closely. "Load them up!" Collins barked the command. "Chinook 1, handlers with dogs. We're burning daylight." Sergeant First Class Burke, 15 years in the K9 program, 4 combat deployments, the kind of man who could read a dog's body language better than most people read books, grabbed Shadow's harness and guided the German Shepherd toward the waiting helicopter. Shadow took 3 steps, then stopped. The dog's entire body went rigid, head swiveling back toward the ammunition crates where Elena sat. A low whine escaped Shadow's throat, not aggressive, not fearful, but something else entirely. Something that sounded almost like recognition. "Shadow, heel." Burke's voice carried the authoritative tone of a man who expected immediate compliance. "Shadow, heel." The German Shepherd ignored him completely. For the first time in 3 years of partnership, Shadow ignored a direct command. Rex chose that moment to lunge. The leash snapped taut in Collins's grip, as 70 pounds of Belgian Malinois threw itself toward Elena with single-minded determination. The sudden force nearly yanked Collins off his feet. "What the? Control your dog!" But Rex wasn't alone anymore. One by one, the remaining dogs began straining against their restraints. Titan, the massive Dutch shepherd, dragged Private Morrison 3 feet across the sand before the young soldier could dig in his heels. Luna and Athena broke into synchronized howls that rose above even the Chinook's engines. Ghost dropped into a playbow, tail wagging furiously, pointed directly at the silent woman on the ammunition crate. 12 dogs, 12 handlers, 12 separate struggles playing out across the airstrip as the carefully orchestrated evacuation dissolved into chaos. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled over the radio from Chinook 2. "Collins, what's your status? We're showing green for departure." Collins didn't answer. He was too busy staring at Rex, who had somehow slipped his collar entirely and was now sprinting across the tarmac. The Belgian Malinois covered the 20 meters in seconds, sand spraying from his paws with each powerful stride. Elena rose from the crate, her hand coming up in a gesture that could have been defensive, or could have been something else. Rex skidded to a halt exactly 1 meter in front of her, and sat. Perfect form, perfect stillness, the kind of precision that only came from thousands of repetitions, with a handler who demanded nothing less than excellence. Collins drew his sidearm. "That dog's gone rabid. I'm putting him down." "No." Elena's voice, her first word since arriving at the airstrip, cut through the chaos with startling authority. She stepped forward, placing herself directly between Rex and Collins's weapon. "Don't." For a moment, something shifted in the atmosphere. The desperate, chaotic energy of the evacuation seemed to pause, held in suspension by the confrontation unfolding at its center. Doc Wheeler, the unit's combat medic, pushed through the crowd of onlookers. "Stand down, Collins. Let me assess the situation before you start shooting." Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Every subscription helps us bring more incredible stories of unsung heroes to life. And if you've ever witnessed a moment where someone was completely underestimated, drop a comment below. Now, let's get back to Firebase Sentinel, where 12 military dogs are about to reveal a secret no one saw coming. Collins didn't lower his weapon. "Wheeler, this civilian has somehow compromised our entire K9 unit. That's a security threat. She's a medical volunteer, not a Russian spy." Wheeler knelt beside Rex, running practiced hands over the dog's flanks, checking for signs of distress or illness. Rex ignored him completely, his attention fixed on Elena with an intensity that bordered on worship. "His vitals are fine. Better than fine, actually. He's calm." Calm? He just broke formation and assaulted a civilian. He didn't assault anyone. He sat at her feet like she's the Queen of England. Wheeler stood, his expression troubled. "Collins, I've seen a lot of strange behavior in combat zones, but something's going on here that we don't understand." Elena remained motionless throughout the examination, her eyes fixed on Rex with an expression that was impossible to read. Sorrow, recognition, longing. The emotions flickered across her features too quickly to categorize before disappearing behind a mask of careful neutrality. The other 11 dogs had stopped pulling against their handlers. Instead, they had collectively oriented toward their position, sitting or lying in a rough semicircle that encompassed nearly half the airstrip. Waiting. Lieutenant Hayes strode forward, his patience visibly fraying. "This is absurd. We have 40 minutes until this base becomes a crater, and we're standing around because some dogs are having a moment." He grabbed Elena's arm. "You, civilian, you're coming with me for questioning." Elena didn't resist, didn't protest, simply allowed herself to be pulled away from Rex with the passive compliance of someone accustomed to being handled roughly. But as Hayes's grip tightened around her bicep, something changed in the circle of dogs. 11 growls rose in perfect unison. Not aggressive barking, not frantic yipping, just a low, sustained warning that vibrated through the air like the hum of a tuning fork. Hayes froze. Rex rose from his sitting position, hackles raised, lips peeling back to reveal teeth that had been trained to kill on command. "Release her!" Collins's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Hayes, let go of the civilian, now." The lieutenant's hand opened reflexively. Elena stepped away, rubbing her arm where his fingers had dug into the flesh. The growling stopped immediately. Sergeant Major Torres had been watching the entire spectacle from beside Chinook 2. A survivor of 3 deployments to Kandahar province, His face bore the roadmap of a career spent in the world's most unforgiving places. Scar tissue from an IED blast, crow's feet earned from squinting through desert sun, the kind of permanent tension around the eyes that came from expecting the worst, and usually being right. Now, that scarred face wore an expression of troubled recognition. "That woman," he muttered to no one in particular. "I've seen her somewhere before." Burke approached Collins, his voice pitched low enough that only the master sergeant could hear. "I've been working with Shadow for 3 years. 3 years. That dog has never disobeyed a command. Not in training, not in combat, not when we were pinned down in Fallujah with rounds coming in from 3 directions." He paused, watching as Shadow crept closer to Elena, belly low to the ground, tail wagging in submissive greeting. "Whatever's happening here, it's not normal. These dogs know something we don't." Collins holstered his weapon reluctantly. "Then let's find out what." He crossed the distance to Elena in 4 aggressive strides, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, the signs of her exhaustion were evident, dark circles beneath her eyes, the slightly hollowed cheeks of someone who had been missing meals, a fine tremor in her hands that could have been fear. Could have been. "Who are you?" Collins demanded. "And don't give me that volunteer nonsense. Nobody's dogs act like this around a stranger." Elena's response was barely audible. "I'm just passing through." "Passing through?" Collins laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, this is a forward operating base in the middle of hostile territory. Nobody passes through here without a reason." Corporal Diaz joined them, her expression hard. "Maybe she's with the enemy, slipped something into the dog's food. Some kind of chemical agent that makes them docile. And then stood around waiting for us to catch her?" Burke shook his head. "That doesn't track." "Nothing about this tracks." Hayes had recovered his composure, though he kept a careful distance from the ring of dogs still surrounding Elena. "What I know is that we have less than 40 minutes until Taliban artillery turns this place into rubble, and our entire K9 asset is refusing to board. That's a crisis regardless of the cause." Private Morrison had been circling the perimeter of the confrontation, his phone held at chest level, camera lens pointed at Elena. "I'm documenting everything. If she's a spy or a saboteur, HQ's going to want evidence." Elena's eyes flicked toward Morrison, just for an instant, before returning to their downcast position. The movement was so brief that almost no one noticed. Torres noticed. The sergeant major had been edging closer throughout the interrogation, his attention fixed on Elena with the intensity of a man trying to remember a dream. There was something about the way she held herself, the subtle shift of her weight, the almost imperceptible rhythm of her breathing. Little things, insignificant things, things that military training drilled into muscle memory so deep it became part of who you were. "Collins." Torres's voice carried a note of uncertainty that was entirely foreign to his character. "That woman. Ask her where she served. Where she—" Collins turned to stare at his senior enlisted advisor. "Torres, she's a civilian, a volunteer. They don't serve anywhere. Ask her anyway." Something in Torres's tone made Collins hesitate. After 20 years of shared deployments, he had learned to trust the older man's instincts even when they defied logic. "Fine," he turned back to Elena. "The sergeant major wants to know where you served. Humor him." Elena's mask slipped, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for something that looked like grief to surface before being ruthlessly suppressed. "I haven't served anywhere," she said quietly. "I'm just a volunteer." "Liar." Torres stepped closer, ignoring the warning rumble from Rex. "I know that stance. I know that breathing pattern. I know the way you scan your environment every 30 seconds without moving your head." He was directly in front of her now, close enough to see the way her pupils contracted under scrutiny. "You've been trained well. The question is, by who?" The first artillery shell exploded 3 kilometers to the south. The sound was distant enough to be almost abstract, a low crump followed by a pillar of smoke rising against the evening sky. But everyone on the airstrip understood what it meant. The countdown had begun. "We don't have time for interrogations." Hayes was already moving toward Chinook 1. "Load whatever dogs will cooperate and leave the rest. We can't—" "No one gets left behind." Collins's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Not the handlers, not the dogs. No one." "Then figure out how to make them board." Elena cleared her throat. The sound was soft, almost lost beneath the distant rumble of artillery, but it somehow commanded attention. "May I try something?" Every eye turned toward her. The woman who had barely spoken, the civilian who didn't belong, the stranger who had somehow become the center of everything. Collins's jaw tightened. Try what? Let me talk to them. She gestured toward the ring of dogs. To the dogs. Maybe I can calm them down. Talk to them. Diaz's voice dripped with contempt. What are you, some kind of dog whisperer? This isn't a movie. No. Elena's response was so quiet it was almost swallowed by the wind. It's not. She stepped forward, moving toward Rex with a slow deliberation that seemed almost ceremonial. The Belgian Malinois watched her approach with unwavering attention, his tail beginning to wag in slow, measured sweeps. Elena knelt in the sand, bringing herself to the dog's eye level. For a long moment, she simply studied him. The pattern of his fur, the old scar above his left eye, the particular way his ears tilted when he was focused. Then she whispered something. The words were too soft for anyone else to hear, just a string of syllables that could have been anything. A command, a name, a prayer. Rex's response was immediate. The dog dropped into a perfect down position, front paws extended, chin resting on the sand. His entire body seemed to relax, the tension draining out of him like water from a broken vessel. What the? Burke stepped forward, then stopped as Shadow broke away from his handler and trotted toward Elena. The German shepherd settled beside Rex, assuming the same position without any visible command. One by one, the remaining dogs followed. Ghost, Titan, Luna, Athena, Blaze, Storm, Viper, Echo, Phantom Jr. 11 more animals abandoning their handlers to gather around the kneeling woman, arranging themselves in a formation that looked almost military in its precision. 12 dogs, 12 perfect downs, 12 pairs of eyes fixed on Elena Martinez like she was the only person in the world who mattered. That's impossible, Burke breathed. That formation, I've seen it before. In classified training footage. It's called the Pack Acknowledgement Protocol. Only handlers from... He trailed off, his face draining of color. From what? Collins demanded. Burke didn't answer. He was too busy staring at Elena, who had risen from her kneeling position and was surveying the dogs with an expression that combined profound sadness with something that looked almost like pride. Ghost Handler Unit, Torres finished quietly. It's from the Ghost Handler Unit, the Black Ops K9 program. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The one that got wiped out at Kandahar 3 years ago. The second artillery shell hit closer than the first, maybe 2 kilometers now. The Taliban were walking their fire toward the base with methodical precision. Colonel Harrison emerged from Chinook 2, his expression grim as he surveyed the impossible scene before him. Someone want to explain why my evacuation has turned into a circus? Sir, Collins snapped to attention. We have a situation with the K9 assets. They're refusing to board, and this civilian appears to be the only one they'll respond to. Harrison's gaze settled on Elena with the calculating intensity of a man who had spent 30 years learning to read people in life-or-death situations. Is that so? Elena met his eyes for the first time since arriving at Firebase Sentinel. The contact lasted only a moment, but something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. Colonel? Elena's voice had changed. The meek, apologetic tone was gone, replaced by something steadier, more measured. These dogs won't board without me. I don't fully understand why, but I know it's true. If you want them on those helicopters before the shelling reaches us, I need to come along. A civilian demanding passage on a military extraction. Harrison's expression gave nothing away. That's a bold move. I'm not demanding anything. I'm offering a solution to your problem. She gestured toward the 12 dogs still holding their formation. They're worth millions in training investment, years of operational experience. They've saved countless lives, and they'll save countless more if they survive the night. A pause. I can make that happen, but only if I'm with them. Harrison studied her for a long moment. Around them, the organized chaos of evacuation continued. Soldiers loading equipment, pilots running final checks, medics securing casualties for transport. The distant percussion of artillery provided a steady reminder that time was bleeding away with every second of deliberation. What's your name? Harrison asked finally. Elena Martinez? And your real name? The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena's expression flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition that she'd been caught in something she hadn't expected. I don't know what you mean, sir. I think you do. Harrison's voice carried no accusation, only calm certainty. but we don't have time for that conversation right now. Get on Chinook 1 with the dogs. Collins, your unit is responsible for her until we reach Camp Phoenix. I want answers before we touch down." Collins looked like he wanted to object. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Finally, he simply nodded. "Yes, sir." Elena moved toward the first helicopter, and all 12 dogs rose as one to follow her. They fell into formation naturally, instinctively, surrounding her in a protective diamond that would have taken months of training to achieve with any normal handler. Burke watched them go, his expression haunted. "Master Sergeant, those dogs have never worked together before. Different handlers, different deployment histories. Some of them have barely been in the same room." He shook his head slowly. "How does she make them move like they're a single unit?" Collins didn't have an answer, but as he followed his dogs toward the waiting Chinook, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had all just stumbled into something far bigger than an emergency evacuation. Something that had been waiting 3 years to reveal itself. The interior of the CH-47 Chinook smelled of hydraulic fluid, sweat, and the particular mustiness of military working dogs who had spent too long in the desert heat. Elena settled onto the mesh seating along the starboard side, her back against the vibrating hull, her eyes on the 12 animals who had chosen to follow her into an uncertain future. Collins sat directly across from her, his posture aggressive, his attention unwavering. "Start talking." The helicopter lurched as its wheels left the ground, climbing rapidly to escape the effective range of Taliban small arms fire. Through the open rear ramp, Elena could see Firebase Sentinel shrinking below them, the first orange flickers of artillery impacts already blooming at its northern perimeter. "I told you." Her voice was steady despite the vibration. "I'm a medical volunteer. I was attached to—" "Save it." Collins leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I've spent 15 years in this program. I've trained hundreds of handlers and worked with thousands of dogs. What you did back there, that formation, that response, isn't something you learn in volunteer orientation." He jabbed a finger toward Rex, who was lying contentedly at Elena's feet. "That dog has been mine for 3 years. 3 years of daily training, combat deployments, shared meals, and shared bunks. And he just walked away from me like I don't exist, like he found something better." His voice hardened. "So, I'm going to ask you one more time. Who are you?" Elena's hand moved almost unconsciously to Rex's head, fingers finding the spot behind his ear that made his back leg twitch with pleasure. "Would you believe me if I said I don't entirely know anymore? No. Then I don't know what to tell you." Burke cleared his throat from his position near the cockpit. "There might be another way to get answers." He was scrolling through something on his tablet, the pale glow of the screen illuminating his troubled features. "I've been reviewing Shadow's behavioral history. The timestamps of his most severe separation episodes, they all cluster around one date." "Which date?" "August 12th, 2021. Burke looked up, his eyes finding Elena's across the crowded cabin. "The day the Kandahar convoy was ambushed. The day Ghost Handler Unit 7 was destroyed." Something shifted in Elena's expression, a crack in the carefully maintained facade. For just a moment, the mask slipped far enough to reveal the raw grief underneath. "That's not possible," she said softly. "I wasn't—" "August 12th. Torres had been silent since boarding, wedged into a corner near the rear ramp, with the look of a man wrestling with memories he'd rather forget. Now he spoke with the deliberate precision of someone reconstructing a puzzle. 2021, 1400 hours. Convoy Bravo was moving through Sector 7 when the lead vehicle hit an IED. Secondary ambush from elevated positions. RPGs, small arms, the works." He paused, his scarred face twisted with remembered horror. "I was in the 3rd Humvee, took shrapnel to the face when the blast wave hit. But even through all that chaos, I remember the dogs." "What dogs?" Diaz asked. "The ones that came out of nowhere." Torres's voice had taken on a distant quality, like a man reciting something he had seen in a dream. "We were pinned down, no cover, taking casualties. And then suddenly there were these dogs. Military working dogs, all of them, attacking the ambush positions, tearing into the insurgents like demons sent from somewhere." He shook his head. "There was a handler with them, a woman, small, dark hair, moving through the kill zone like she was untouchable." Elena's hands had stilled on Rex's fur. Her breathing had changed, becoming shallow and rapid, the first sign of distress she had shown since the confrontation began. "She cleared a path," Torres continued. got us moving toward cover, saved maybe 40, 50 lives that day just by buying us time to reorganize. His eyes were locked on Elena now, searching her face for something he desperately hoped, or feared, to find. And then the secondary IED went off, right under the vehicle she was using for cover. "Torres," Collins's voice was sharp, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying that woman was supposed to be dead. I'm saying I watched the vehicle explode. I'm saying there was no way anyone could have survived that blast." Torres stood, crossing the narrow cabin with unsteady steps, stopping directly in front of Elena. "And I'm saying that for 3 years, I've carried the face of that woman in my memory, the face of someone who died, saving my life." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and tilted Elena's chin upward toward the cabin's overhead lights. "Hello, Phantom," he said quietly. "I thought I'd lost you forever." The name hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Around them, the Chinook's engines roared on, indifferent to the revelation unfolding within its belly. Elena's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a flinch, a sharp intake of breath, the almost reflexive stiffening of someone who had been struck without warning. "You're mistaken," she managed. I'm not." "The scar." Torres gestured toward her left temple, where a thin line of pale tissue disappeared beneath her hairline. "The blast pattern from the IED. I've thought about that day every night for 3 years. I know what I saw." "Torres, that's enough," Collins's voice carried warning. "Whatever you think you remember, I remember perfectly." Torres didn't look away from Elena. "I remember Staff Sergeant Maya Reyes, call sign Phantom, Ghost Handler Unit 7. The woman who drove her vehicle directly into the ambush to give us cover. The woman who went up in flames and somehow kept fighting. The woman who should have received a Medal of Honor, but got a posthumous Navy Cross instead, because there wasn't enough left of her to testify at the ceremony." Rex rose from his position at Elena's feet, pressing his body against her legs in a gesture that was unmistakably protective, comforting. "She's gone," Elena whispered. "Whoever she was, whatever she did, she's gone now." "Convenient," Diaz's voice cut through the moment with sharp skepticism. "A dead war hero, can't verify, can't contradict, perfect cover story." "It's not a story." "Then prove it." Diaz stepped closer, her expression hard. "If you're really Phantom, if you're really this legendary handler who died at Kandahar, prove it. Show us something only she would know." Elena's jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm not claiming to be anyone. But these dogs are." Burke had been studying the animals throughout the exchange, noting their positioning, their body language, the subtle signals passing between them. "These dogs are telling us something, and I've been in this business long enough to know that dogs don't lie. They can't lie." He gestured toward the 12 animals now clustered around Elena in a formation that looked almost ceremonial. Shadow was part of Ghost Handler Unit 7. So was Ghost, and Viper. 3 dogs from that unit survived Kandahar because someone ordered them to run before the final explosion. They were reassigned to different handlers, different bases, different programs. His voice dropped. But they've never forgotten whoever gave that command. "That's speculation. It's behavioral science." Burke's tone left no room for argument. "These dogs imprinted on someone during their developmental period. Someone who trained them with techniques that we've never been able to replicate. Someone who became their pack leader at the deepest possible level." He paused. "If that person died, they would have grieved, would have showed signs of depression, separation anxiety, behavioral problems. And they did, for months after Kandahar. All 3 survivors exhibited exactly those symptoms. So, what changed?" Burke looked at Elena with an expression that was equal parts wonder and suspicion. "They stopped, about 6 months ago. All 3 dogs, in different locations, stopped showing signs of grief within the same 2-week period. Like something happened, like someone came back." The helicopter banked hard, beginning its approach to Camp Phoenix. Through the windows, the lights of the forward operating base glittered like fallen stars against the darkening desert. Collins had been processing everything in silence, his tactical mind working through the implications of what he was hearing. Now he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "If what you're suggesting is true, if this woman is somehow connected to Ghost Handler Unit 7, then we have a serious security breach. That program was classified at the highest level. The handlers, the techniques, the operations, everything about it was buried after Kandahar, because everyone involved died," Torres said quietly. "Everyone except her, maybe." Collins turned his attention back to Elena. Which means either you're telling the truth and you're a resurrected ghost with a lot of explaining to do, or you're an extremely sophisticated operative who's been playing a long game for reasons we don't yet understand. He leaned forward. Either way, I want answers, and I want them before we land. Elena closed her eyes. Around her, 12 dogs pressed closer, forming a living wall between her and her interrogators. Rex's head found her lap. Shadow leaned against her leg. Ghost positioned himself at her feet like a living footrest. I don't remember Kandahar, she said finally. Not all of it. Not properly. What do you mean? I mean there are pieces, fragments, like watching a movie through a broken window. Her voice had changed again, losing its careful neutrality, revealing something raw underneath. I remember the dogs. I remember telling them to run. I remember heat and pain and darkness. A pause. And then I remember waking up in a hospital I couldn't identify, with doctors I'd never met, being told that my name was Elena Martinez, and I had been in a car accident. Silence filled the cabin. Amnesia? Hayes's voice carried heavy skepticism. That's your explanation? You conveniently forgot being a classified military asset? I didn't forget. Elena's eyes opened, and there was something fierce in them now. Something that didn't match the meek volunteer they had encountered at Firebase Sentinel. Someone made me forget, or tried to, but memory isn't stored in just one place. She gestured toward the dog surrounding her. It's stored in relationships, in connections, in the things and people we love. Rex's tail thumped against the cabin floor. They remembered me, Elena continued softly, even when I couldn't remember myself. They have been remembering me for 3 years, waiting for me to come back. A single tear traced down her cheek, disappearing into the fur of the dog pressed against her face. And when I finally got close enough to feel them again, everything started coming back. That's why you were at Firebase Sentinel. Torres's voice held the quality of revelation. You weren't there by accident. You tracked them. I tracked the assignments, medical volunteer positions that happened to be near bases where the surviving dogs were stationed. It took 18 months to get close enough to see them. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't even know why I was doing it at first, just that I had to. Burke pulled up something else on his tablet, scrolling through records with increasing urgency. Master Sergeant, I'm seeing something here. Visitor logs from 3 different installations over the past year. A volunteer named Elena Martinez requesting medical supply deliveries to, he looked up, to the K-9 facilities. I never touched them, Elena said quickly. Never approached them, just watched from a distance. Watched what? Watched to see if I was crazy. Watched to see if the feelings I had, the memories that didn't make sense, were real or just trauma playing tricks. She stroked Rex's ear with absent gentleness. And then today happened. The evacuation, the chaos. And I was standing there watching them load up. Watching them take my... She caught herself. Watching them leave. And something inside me just... broke. Broke how? I couldn't let them go. Not again. Not without... She trailed off, unable to finish. Without what? Collins's voice had softened slightly. Not sympathy, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding, without knowing if they remembered me too. The Chinook's descent warning sounded, breaking the moment. Within minutes, they would be on the ground at Camp Phoenix, surrounded by military police and intelligence officers demanding explanations that Elena might not be able to give. But in those final moments of flight, something had shifted in the atmosphere of the cabin. The hostility hadn't disappeared entirely. Too many questions remained unanswered for that. But it had been tempered by something else. Something that looked almost like respect. When we land, Collins said slowly, you're going to be detained, questioned, probably for a very long time. I can't stop that. Elena nodded. I know. But if what you're telling us is true, if you really are who Torres thinks you are, then you deserve better than what's coming. He paused. You deserve to be welcomed home. I don't know if I have a home anymore. Elena's voice was barely audible above the engine noise. I don't know if I'm the person who left it. Rex lifted his head, catching her eye with an expression of such complete devotion that it answered questions words never could. Maybe home isn't a place, Torres said quietly. Maybe it's the people who never forget you, the ones who keep waiting, no matter how long it takes. 12 dogs pressed closer around the woman, who might be Phantom, might be Maya Reyes, might be someone else entirely. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was that they had found her, and they weren't letting go. We're at the turning point now. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share it with someone who appreciates stories of loyalty and hidden strength. Your engagement helps these stories reach more viewers who need to hear them. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. The truth about Elena is seconds away from being exposed. Camp Phoenix blazed with light against the darkening Afghan sky. The Chinooks touched down in a roar of engines and whirling sand, and within seconds, the organized chaos of military logistics engulfed them. But it wasn't the usual reception. Colonel Harrison emerged from Chinook 2 with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression growing more troubled with every word he heard. Around him, base personnel who should have been focused on the evacuation logistics were instead staring at the first helicopter, where 12 military working dogs had formed a protective circle around a woman nobody recognized. "Clear the area." A military police sergeant was already approaching, his hand on his sidearm. "Unknown civilian needs to be processed and—" "Stand down, Sergeant." Harrison's voice cut through the controlled pandemonium. "Nobody touches her until I get verification from headquarters." "Sir, protocol requires—" "I said stand down." Harrison turned back to his phone conversation, his voice dropping. "Yes, General, I understand the security implications, but what I'm seeing here doesn't match any threat profile I know. These dogs— General, these dogs are acting like they found their handler after years of separation." Collins had positioned himself beside Elena, his stance protective without being obvious about it. The shift had been gradual but unmistakable. The man who had wanted to shoot Rex an hour ago was now guarding the woman the dogs had chosen. "What's happening?" Elena asked quietly. "Harrison's calling in favors, trying to get answers through back channels before the bureaucracy buries you in paperwork and detention cells." Collins glanced at her. "Whatever you are, whoever you are, he seems to think you're worth protecting." "Why would he think that?" Collins didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "Because I've served with Harrison for 12 years, and I've never seen him personally intervene for anyone. Not politicians, not generals, not even his own family when his son got in trouble stateside." A pause. "But he's intervening for you, which means he knows something he's not sharing." Elena's attention shifted to the dogs around her. Rex had moved into what handlers called the guard position, alert, watchful, ready to respond to threats. The others had arranged themselves in a pattern that looked random but was anything but. A tactical formation designed to provide 360 degrees of protection. "They're beautiful," she murmured. "Even after everything, they're still so beautiful." "They're the best." Collins's voice held a note of grudging admiration. "Whatever training methods your ghost handler unit used, they produced dogs that are generations ahead of standard military working animals. The intelligence, the adaptability, the bond formation." He shook his head. "We've been trying to replicate it for 3 years, never even came close." It wasn't about methods. Elena's hand traced the scar on Rex's muzzle. It was about love. Love? In a military program? Love is the most powerful training tool that exists. It's also the most classified. A sad smile crossed her face. The brass never understood that. They wanted techniques, protocols, something they could reduce to a manual and replicate at scale. But what we did, what I think I did, wasn't replicable. It was personal. Burke had joined them, his tablet clutched like a shield against uncertainty. "I've been cross-referencing the deployment histories of the dogs who survived Kandahar. Shadow, Ghost, and Viper were the only 3 from Ghost Handler Unit 7 who made it out. But there's something else." "What?" "These other 9 dogs." Burke gestured toward the remaining animals in the circle. Rex, Titan, Luna, Athena, Blaze, Storm, Echo, Phantom Jr. They're not from the original unit. They're younger, second generation. Elena's breath caught. "Second generation?" Collins frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they're offspring." Burke's voice was careful, like a man delivering news he wasn't sure would be welcomed. Shadow and Ghost were breeding stock before Kandahar. Their puppies, the ones born in the months before the ambush, were distributed to different programs after the unit was destroyed. He looked at Elena with new understanding. But if someone trained the parents using those classified techniques, the puppies would have been exposed during their critical developmental period. They would have imprinted, not on the people who raised them later, On the person who was there when they first opened their eyes. Their mother, Torres said quietly. They imprinted on their mother. Elena's composure finally cracked. The tears came silently, streaming down her face as she looked at the dogs surrounding her, the 3 survivors she had saved and the 9 children she had apparently delivered into the world, her family, her pack, her legacy. I remember now, she whispered. I remember the births, shadows litter, ghosts, the way they smelled when they were wet and new, the way their eyes looked when they finally opened. She was crying openly now, making no effort to hide it. I named them. I trained them. I loved them. A shuddering breath. And then I sent them away because I knew what was coming, because the mission was more important than my own survival. What mission? Collins demanded. What was Ghost Handler Unit 7 actually doing in Kandahar? Before Elena could answer, Harrison returned. His face was ashen, his phone hanging loosely at his side like a forgotten weapon. Master Sergeant? His voice carried a quality Collins had never heard before, something between awe and horror. I need you to secure this area immediately. No one in or out without my personal authorization. Sir? I just got off the phone with JSOC. They're scrambling a classified briefing team from Washington. Harrison's eyes found Elena's. It seems the story of Ghost Handler Unit 7 isn't as finished as everyone believed, and the woman standing in front of us is either the key to understanding what really happened, or the biggest security breach since Snowden. The words hung in the air like storm clouds gathering before lightning. Around them, the dogs pressed closer to Elena, as if sensing the threat implicit in Harrison's statement. Rex's hackles rose. Shadow's ears flattened. Ghost assumed a stance that looked almost aggressive, protective, defensive, ready. What are you going to do with her? Torres stepped forward, positioning himself beside Elena and the dogs. She saved my life, Colonel. She saved 47 lives at Kandahar. Whatever else she might be, she's a hero. That's exactly the problem. Harrison's voice was heavy. Heroes don't disappear for 3 years and then show up unannounced at a forward operating base during an emergency evacuation. Heroes don't have classified files that even generals can't access. Heroes don't. He trailed off, looking at the woman surrounded by her impossible canine family. Heroes don't come back from the dead. I didn't come back. Elena's voice was stronger now, the tears still wet on her cheeks, but her composure returning. I was never dead. I was hidden, kept somewhere, protected maybe, or contained. She shook her head. I don't know which. I don't know why. But I know that whatever happened at Kandahar, whatever I did, it wasn't supposed to be known. By anyone. Then why are you here? Elena looked at the dogs, at Rex's faithful eyes, at Shadow's graying muzzle, at the 9 younger animals who were watching her, with expressions of trust so pure it hurt to witness. Because some things are more important than secrets, she said simply. Because I couldn't spend another day pretending to be someone I'm not. Because, her voice cracked, because they needed me, and I needed them. Morrison had been hovering at the edge of the group, his phone still clutched in his hand. The young private had abandoned his earlier hostility, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. I deleted the photos, he said quietly. The ones I took at Firebase Sentinel. I thought she was a threat. But watching her with these dogs, he shook his head. Nobody fakes that. Nobody can. Private, I know, sir. Protocol requires documentation of all security incidents. I'll accept whatever consequences come. Morrison's jaw set with unexpected determination. But I'm not helping anyone build a case against someone who loves these animals more than I've ever seen anyone love anything. The moment stretched, fragile and pregnant with possibility. Then Harrison did something that surprised everyone. He laughed. It wasn't a mocking sound or a dismissive one. It was the laugh of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore, confronted with something that surprised him anyway. Well, he said, I suppose that settles it. Settles what, sir? The question of whether Staff Sergeant Reyes, if that's who she is, still has people willing to fight for her. Harrison looked around at the assembled group. Collins, standing guard. Torres, ready to defend. Burke, seeking understanding. Morrison, choosing conscience over protocol. Whatever comes next, she's not facing it alone. He turned to address his security detail. Set up a perimeter. No one approaches without my authorization. And get me a secure line to Washington. I need to make some calls before the briefing team arrives." As the colonel strode away, Elena found herself surrounded by an unlikely collection of allies. Dogs who had never forgotten her. Soldiers who were just beginning to understand her. A family formed not by blood or regulation, but by something far more powerful: recognition. The night air was cool against her tear-stained face as she looked up at the Afghan stars, the same stars that had witnessed her apparent death 3 years ago, the same stars that now watched her impossible resurrection. "I remember something else," she said quietly, to no one in particular. Collins looked at her. "What?" "Oh, a voice. At the hospital. Before I forgot everything." Her brow furrowed with the effort of recollection. "Someone saying that the mission wasn't over, that I was being preserved for something." "For what?" Elena shook her head slowly. "I don't know yet, but I think—" She looked down at Rex, at Shadow, at all 12 dogs who had chosen her over their own handlers. "I think I'm about to find out." In the distance, the sound of approaching helicopters announced the arrival of forces that would demand answers Elena might not be able to give. Forces that might see her as an asset, a threat, or something worse. But in that moment, surrounded by dogs who loved her and soldiers who were learning to trust her, she felt something she hadn't experienced since waking in that unknown hospital with a stranger's name. She felt like she might finally be home. The interrogation room at Camp Phoenix had been hastily converted from a supply closet, which meant Elena spent the next 6 hours being questioned while seated on a folding chair surrounded by boxes of MREs and cleaning supplies. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with a monotonous drone that seemed designed to erode sanity. Colonel Harrison had insisted on being present, which prevented the worst of the intelligence community's excesses. The briefing team from Washington, 3 men in civilian clothes who never gave their names and never smiled, circled her with questions that probed every aspect of her fragmented memory. Who recruited her for Ghost Handler Unit 7? What operations the unit had conducted? How she survived the Kandahar explosion? Where she had been for the past 3 years? Why she chose to resurface now? Elena answered what she could, which wasn't much. The memories came in pieces, sharp and clear for some moments, completely absent for others. She remembered the dogs, the training, the fierce pride of building something unprecedented, but the specifics of missions, of commanding officers, of the political machinery that had created and then buried her unit, those remained shrouded in fog. "You expect us to believe that a highly trained special operations asset simply forgot everything?" The lead interrogator, a thin man with eyes that never seemed to blink, leaned forward. "That seems convenient." "Convenient for who?" Elena's voice remained steady despite her exhaustion. "I lost 3 years of my life. I lost my identity, my purpose, my family. If someone did this to me deliberately, they didn't do it for my benefit. But you can't tell us who, no, or why, no, or what Ghost Handler Unit 7 was really doing in Kandahar." Elena closed her eyes. Behind them, fragmentary images played like a corrupted film. Explosions, gunfire, the sound of dogs barking, heat and pain, and something else. Something she couldn't quite grasp. "We were protecting something," she said slowly, "or someone. I remember a convoy. I remember being told that the cargo was more important than our lives." A pause. "I remember believing them." "What cargo?" "I don't know. I never knew. That was part of the protocol. Handlers didn't have operational intelligence beyond what was necessary to complete our missions. We followed orders. We did our jobs. We trusted that the bigger picture made sense even if we couldn't see it." The lead interrogator exchanged glances with his colleagues. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. "We're going to need you to submit to a formal psychological evaluation," he said finally, "including pharmacological regression therapy. Your memories may be suppressed rather than lost. Proper techniques could restore them." Harrison spoke for the first time since the questioning began. "You're talking about chemically assisted interrogation of a decorated military veteran. That's going to require higher authorization than you're carrying. Colonel, with respect, this is a matter of national security. So is the dignity of the people who serve this country." Harrison's voice carried an edge that made even the civilian interrogators hesitate. "Staff Sergeant Reyes, if that's who she is, has rights, due process, protection under the UCMJ. You don't get to bypass all of that because you're curious about what she knows. We're not curious. We're concerned. The thin man's expression hardened. Ghost Handler Unit 7 was part of Operation Cerberus. Do you know what Operation Cerberus was, Colonel? Harrison's silence was answer enough. Classified beyond your clearance level. Beyond mine too, actually. But I know enough to understand that whatever happened in Kandahar 3 years ago didn't end with that convoy ambush. The interrogator turned back to Elena. People are asking questions. Pieces are starting to fit together in ways that make certain individuals very nervous. And then you appear, the one person who might actually remember what really happened at the exact moment when everything is threatening to unravel. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not fear exactly, recognition. Someone wants me found, she said quietly. What? The timing, the circumstances, the way everything lined up to bring me to Firebase Sentinel on the same day as an emergency evacuation. Her mind was racing now, fragments of tactical training surfacing like debris from a shipwreck. I thought I was following my own instincts, finding the dogs, coming home, but what if I was being led? Led by who? I don't know. Elena's hands clenched. But whoever's been keeping me hidden for 3 years, whoever made me forget, they did it for a reason. And reasons don't change unless circumstances do. What circumstances? Something about Operation Cerberus. Something that's happening now, something that requires me to remember what I was made to forget. She looked up at the interrogators with new determination. You want answers? So do I. But you're not going to find them by locking me in a closet and pumping me full of drugs. You're going to find them by letting me do what I was trained to do. Which is what, exactly? Elena smiled, and for the first time, there was something dangerous in it. Something that reminded everyone in the room that they weren't dealing with a traumatized victim. They were dealing with a weapon. Follow the breadcrumbs, she said. Someone has been leaving them. Someone who knows what I am and what I can do. And the dogs? Her smile faded into something more complicated. The dogs are part of it. They always have been. I just haven't figured out how yet. The interrogation ended without resolution. The Washington team withdrew to consult with their superiors. Harrison arranged for Elena to be housed in a secure but comfortable facility rather than a detention cell. And the dogs, all 12 of them, refused to be separated from her, forcing the base commander to make unprecedented accommodations. By the time the sun rose over Camp Phoenix, Elena was lying on a cot surrounded by warm bodies and steady breathing, finally allowing herself to sleep for the first time in what felt like years. But even in her dreams, she could feel it. Something was coming, and for better or worse, she was at the center of it. Doc Wheeler found her in the medical tent 3 days later, examining Shadow's left hind leg with the careful attention of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. That's the IED injury, Wheeler said, settling onto a supply crate nearby. From Kandahar. The surgeons wanted to amputate, but his handler at the time refused, said Shadow wouldn't be the same dog without all 4 legs. Elena's fingers traced the old scar tissue with infinite gentleness. The handler was wrong. He would have been exactly the same dog, just with 3 legs instead of 4. She smiled at Shadow's patient expression. Dogs don't define themselves by their bodies. They define themselves by their hearts. That sounds like something from a training manual. It was. One I wrote. Elena straightened, meeting Wheeler's eyes. Ghost Handler Unit 7 had a different philosophy than standard K-9 programs. We believed that the bond between handler and dog was more important than any technique or command structure, that love was the foundation everything else built on. And the military brass accepted that? They accepted results. As long as our dogs performed better than everyone else's, they didn't care how we achieved it. A shadow crossed her face. Maybe they should have cared more. Maybe if they had understood what we were really creating. What were you creating? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Family, she said finally. We were creating family, loyalty that couldn't be broken by fear or pain or time, connections that survived death itself. She gestured toward Shadow, toward the other dogs resting throughout the tent. You see how they are with me? That's not training. That's not conditioning. That's love, passed down through generations, mother to child to grandchild, an unbroken chain of devotion. Wheeler absorbed this in thoughtful silence. You remember all this? It's coming back, slowly, in pieces. Elena's hand found Rex's head, scratching the spot behind his ear that always made him groan with pleasure. Being near them helps, like like they're reflecting parts of myself back to me, parts that were lost. The interrogators won't be satisfied with pieces. They want the whole picture. I know. Elena's expression hardened. But I can't give them what I don't have. And more importantly, I'm not sure I should give them what I might have. What do you mean? 3 years ago, I was part of something called Operation Cerberus. I don't remember the details, but I remember feeling proud of what we accomplished, feeling like we were making a difference. She paused. Now I wake up in a hospital with a stranger's name and false memories, and the same people who created my unit are acting like I'm a threat to national security. Does that sound like the behavior of people who have nothing to hide? Wheeler's expression grew troubled. You think someone in the government arranged your disappearance? I think someone wanted Ghost Handler Unit 7 buried, along with everyone who knew what we really did. I think I was supposed to die at Kandahar, and when I didn't... Elena's voice dropped. When I didn't, they improvised, made me forget instead of making me dead. Maybe because they might need me again someday. Maybe because killing a decorated veteran raises more questions than erasing her. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Elena stood, beginning to pace the confines of the medical tent. I spent 3 years living as Elena Martinez, working menial jobs, drifting from city to city without purpose. And the whole time, something inside me was screaming that this wasn't real, that I was more than this, that I belonged somewhere else, doing something important. The dogs. The dogs were the key. When I got close enough to feel them again, to remember what it was like to be part of their pack, the walls started crumbling. She stopped pacing, turning to face Wheeler directly. Someone built those walls, someone with access to advanced psychological techniques and the resources to maintain a false identity for years. That's not a random criminal, that's an operation. She trailed off, eyes widening as something clicked into place. Cerberus, she breathed. The operation wasn't just about what we did in Kandahar. It was about what we knew, what we could prove. Her hands clenched into fists. We discovered something, me and my unit, something that someone was willing to kill to keep secret. What? I don't know yet, but it's still buried in here somewhere. Elena tapped her temple, along with the names and the details and the proof. That's why they didn't just kill me. That's why they couldn't. Because dying with secrets is easy. Living with them means the secrets can be extracted if circumstances require. Wheeler was silent for a long moment, processing the implications of what he was hearing. The Washington team is coming back tomorrow, he said finally. They have got authorization for chemical interrogation. Harrison's fought them off as long as he can, but they're going to get what they want eventually, unless you remember on your own first. Elena looked at the dogs surrounding her, at Rex's patient eyes, at Shadow's scarred leg, at the 9 younger animals who represented a legacy she was only beginning to understand. Then I guess I need to remember faster, she said quietly. That night, Elena dreamed. Not the fragmented nightmares that had plagued her for 3 years, explosions and screams and heat and darkness. This was different. This was memory. She was standing in a training facility she didn't consciously recognize, surrounded by dogs in various stages of development, puppies tumbling over each other, adolescents learning basic commands, adults performing complex tasks with silent efficiency, and everywhere, the sound of her own voice, teaching, encouraging, loving. The bond is everything, Dream Maya was saying to a group of handlers. Technique can be taught, commands can be trained, but the bond, the absolute trust between handler and dog, that has to be built through relationship, through time, through genuine connection. The scene shifted. Now she was in a briefing room, looking at satellite photographs of a convoy route through hostile territory. The cargo is essential, a voice was saying. Someone important, she could tell by the deference in the room. Ghost Handler Unit 7 will provide advanced security, eliminate any threats before the convoy reaches them. Sir, Dream Maya's voice was steady. My dogs aren't assassins. They're partners. If we're being asked to conduct offensive operations, you're being asked to protect something more important than individual concerns, Staff Sergeant. This cargo could change the course of the war, could save thousands of lives. Is that worth a few moral qualms? The scene shifted again. Desert, heat, the convoy winding through mountain passes, and then an ambush. but not the one she expected, not the official story. The first attack came from behind, from their own people. Elena woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright on her cot. Rex was immediately at her side, whining softly, pressing his warm body against her trembling form. "I remember," she whispered into the darkness. "I remember what happened." The convoy hadn't been ambushed by Taliban insurgents. It had been ambushed by American forces, and Ghost Handler Unit 7 had been the only thing standing between the cargo, whatever it was, and the people who wanted to bury it. Elena's hands shook as she processed the implications. She hadn't been a victim of enemy action at Kandahar. She had been a witness to betrayal, and someone had spent 3 years making sure she couldn't testify. The sun wasn't up yet when Elena emerged from her quarters, but Collins was already waiting outside. His expression told her he hadn't slept either. "We need to talk," they said simultaneously. Collins led her to a secure communications room at the edge of Camp Phoenix. The facility was empty at this hour, its walls lined with equipment that hummed and blinked in the pre-dawn darkness. "I've been digging," Collins said, pulling up files on a secure terminal. "Burke's been helping. We started looking into the official reports from Kandahar, the ones that described what happened to Ghost Handler Unit 7. And they don't add up." Collins highlighted a section of text. "According to the after-action report, your unit was providing advanced security for a supply convoy when Taliban insurgents initiated an ambush. You sustained 90% casualties, with only 3 dogs surviving. The cargo was lost. The mission was classified as a failure." Elena studied the report with new eyes. "What's wrong with it?" "Everything." Collins pulled up another document. "First problem, the ambush coordinates. They're in a valley that our forces had cleared 3 days earlier. Satellite imagery confirms no enemy movement in that sector for the entire week leading up to the attack. So the Taliban wasn't there. Not in any significant numbers, which raises the question, who was? Collins switched to another file. Second problem, the casualty reports. According to these records, all 12 handlers from Ghost Handler Unit 7 died at Kandahar. Their bodies were recovered and identified. Elena's blood ran cold. "But I didn't die." "Exactly. So, either the identification was wrong, or—" Collins let the implication hang. "Or someone wanted the records to show we were all dead." Elena's mind was racing. To close the book, prevent any investigation into what actually happened. Third problem, the cargo. Collins pulled up a manifest. According to this, the convoy was carrying standard military supplies, food, ammunition, medical equipment, nothing worth the kind of security presence Ghost Handler Unit 7 would provide. What does that mean? It means the real cargo wasn't on the manifest. Whatever that convoy was actually transporting, someone wanted it kept off the books. Collins leaned back, his expression grave. Burke found something else. Radio intercepts from that day, the few that weren't classified beyond our access. He played an audio file, static-filled, fragmented, but unmistakably real. "All units disengage. Repeat, do not engage the handlers. Cerberus is compromised." Elena's breath caught. "That's not Taliban communications protocol," Collins said quietly. "That's American military encryption, on the same frequency our forces would use." "Friendly fire," Elena whispered. "We were hit by friendly fire. Not friendly, deliberate." Collins turned to face her fully. "Someone in our own chain of command ordered an attack on your convoy, on American soldiers, and then covered it up by blaming the Taliban." The implications were staggering. Treason, murder, a cover-up that reached the highest levels of military command. "The Washington team," Elena said suddenly. "The interrogators. They're not here to find out what I know. They're here to find out if you remember," Collins agreed. "And if you do." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena thought about the chemical interrogation scheduled for tomorrow, the drugs that would strip away her defenses and force her memories to surface, the people waiting to hear what she might reveal. "I need to get out of here," she said. "I know." Collins pulled a folder from his jacket. "That's why I brought these." Inside were travel orders, signed and authenticated. Authorization for Elena Martinez to accompany the K-9 unit on a training deployment to a facility in Nevada, a facility that happened to be outside the jurisdiction of the Washington intelligence team. "How did you—" "Harrison." Collins's expression was grim. "He's been around long enough to know when something stinks, and this situation reeks." He handed her the papers. "You've got 6 hours before anyone realizes you're gone." After that, I can't protect you. Elena looked at the documents in her hands. Freedom, or at least a head start. Why are you doing this? She asked. You barely know me. Yesterday you wanted to shoot my dog. Collins was silent for a long moment. 3 years ago, he said finally, I was a new handler, fresh out of training. Thought I knew everything about working with dogs. A pause. Then I read a classified paper about bond formation techniques, revolutionary stuff. Changed everything I thought I understood about the human-animal connection. Let me guess. The paper was from Ghost Handler Unit 7. Written by Staff Sergeant Maya Reyes, call sign Phantom. Collins met her eyes. I never met you, never saw you work. But everything I know, everything that made me the handler I am today, came from your research, from your methods, from your understanding of what dogs can be when they're treated as partners instead of tools. Elena didn't know what to say. If you're really her, if you're really Phantom, then you've already given more to this program than most people give in a lifetime. And if someone in our own government tried to kill you to cover up their crimes, Collins's jaw tightened, then I want to be on the right side when the truth comes out. The dogs were waiting when Elena returned to her quarters, all 12 of them, arranged in the now familiar protective formation, their eyes tracking her every movement with devotion that transcended mere training. We're going on a trip, she told them quietly, kneeling to touch each head in turn. All of us. Together. Rex's tail began to wag. Shadow pressed his graying muzzle against her palm. Ghost made a sound that was almost like a purr. They had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years of carrying memories their handler couldn't access. 3 years of knowing something was wrong, something was missing, something needed to be fixed. Now, finally, they were going to fix it. Together. The convoy left Camp Phoenix at 0430 hours, just as the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon. 3 military vehicles carrying Elena, her 12 dogs, and a skeleton crew of handlers who had volunteered for a training deployment that was actually an escape. Burke drove the lead vehicle, his tablet propped against the steering wheel, displaying satellite imagery of their route. Torres rode shotgun, his scarred face set in lines of determination. Behind them, in the second vehicle, Collins coordinated communications while Diaz monitored their rear. Elena sat in the back of the third vehicle, surrounded by dogs who had arranged themselves with military precision. Rex at her right hand, Shadow at her left, the others filling every available space with warm bodies and watchful eyes. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something that might have been hope. But hope, she was learning, was a dangerous emotion. It made you believe in possibilities that might never come true. It made you trust in futures that might already be written. The first checkpoint came 40 kilometers outside Camp Phoenix, a routine security stop that should have waved them through with minimal inspection. Instead, they found the road blocked by 3 armored vehicles and a squad of soldiers with weapons raised. Collins's voice crackled over the radio. All units stop. We have a situation. Elena watched through the windshield as a figure emerged from the lead-blocking vehicle. Civilian clothes, thin face, eyes that never seemed to blink. The Washington interrogator. Staff Sergeant Reyes, his voice carried clearly through the desert morning air, you're going to need to step out of the vehicle. We have some questions that can't wait. Around her, 12 dogs began to growl. The desert wind carried dust across the standoff, swirling between the vehicles like the breath of something ancient and indifferent. Elena remained motionless in the back of the transport, her hand resting on Rex's head, feeling the vibration of his growl through her fingertips. I said step out. The Washington interrogator, she still didn't know his name, realized she probably never would, moved closer to the vehicle. This isn't a request, Staff Sergeant. You're in violation of direct orders from who? Collins had emerged from his vehicle, positioning himself between the interrogator and Elena's transport. Because I'm looking at travel orders signed by Colonel Harrison himself. Unless you're telling me you outrank a full-bird colonel, I'm telling you that this woman is a national security concern. Her movements are restricted pending psychological evaluation. The thin man's smile held no warmth. Surely you understand the gravity of the situation. What I understand is that you're blocking a legitimate military convoy on a public road without proper authorization. Collins's voice remained steady, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. Show me your papers or stand aside. The interrogator's smile widened. Master Sergeant, I don't need papers. I have something better. He raised his hand. The soldiers behind him raised their weapons. Elena felt the moment crystallize around her, that peculiar sensation of time slowing when violence became inevitable. She had felt it before, she realized, many times, in places she couldn't quite remember, but her body had never forgotten. Everyone stay calm. Torres had stepped out of the lead vehicle, his hands raised, but his posture communicating something very different from surrender. There's no need for this to escalate. I agree completely. The interrogator gestured toward Elena's transport. All the staff sergeant needs to do is cooperate, answer our questions, submit to evaluation. If she has nothing to hide, she has nothing to fear. And if she does have something to hide, Burke's voice came from somewhere behind Collins, something that certain people would prefer stayed hidden. The interrogator's expression flickered, just for an instant, before smoothing back into professional neutrality. I don't know what you're implying, Sergeant. I'm implying that the official reports from Kandahar don't match the evidence. I'm implying that someone ordered an attack on American soldiers and covered it up. I'm implying that the woman you're so eager to interrogate might be the only witness to crimes that reach very high up the chain of command. Silence stretched across the checkpoint. The soldiers holding weapons exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that they might be on the wrong side of something they didn't understand. The interrogator's composure cracked slightly. Those are serious accusations, Sergeant. I hope you have proof. Working on it. Burke held up his tablet. But I have enough preliminary evidence to trigger a formal investigation, which means anything that happens to Staff Sergeant Reyes from this point forward becomes very, very interesting to military prosecutors. You're bluffing. Try me. Elena watched the exchange with growing awareness. These people, Collins, Burke, Torres, even Diaz, were putting their careers on the line for her, risking everything for a woman they barely knew, based on nothing more than the testimony of 12 dogs and the fragments of a story that might be delusion, unless it wasn't. She opened the vehicle door. Elena, stay inside, Collins started. No. Her voice carried a quality she barely recognized, authority, certainty, the commanding presence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This needs to end. Now. She stepped onto the packed sand of the roadway, Rex immediately at her side, the other 11 dogs flowing out behind her in a formation that looked almost ceremonial. The interrogator's soldiers shifted nervously as the animals took position, not aggressive, but unmistakably ready. You want answers? Elena walked toward the thin man with steady steps. So do I. You want to know what happened at Kandahar? I'm starting to remember. You want to know what Operation Cerberus was really about? She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the slight dilation of his pupils. I think you already know. I don't. 3 years ago, a convoy was transporting something through hostile territory. Something important enough to warrant Ghost Handler Unit 7 as security. Something that never appeared on any manifest. Elena's voice dropped. What was it? The interrogator's face went blank. Not the careful neutrality of a professional, but the sudden emptiness of a man confronted with something he hadn't expected. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Elena stepped closer. Because you're not here to find out what I remember. You're here to find out if I've told anyone else. You're here to contain the damage before it spreads. That's absurd, is it? Elena gestured toward the armed soldiers. You brought enough firepower to start a small war, just to stop one woman and her dogs. That's not standard procedure for a psychological evaluation. That's a containment operation. The soldiers were definitely uncertain now. One of them, young, maybe 22, with the face of someone who had joined the military to serve his country, lowered his weapon slightly. Sir, the young soldier said, what exactly is going on here? Private, maintain your position. No. The soldier's weapon dropped further. I signed up to protect Americans, not threaten them. If there's something wrong here, I want to know what it is. The interrogator's composure shattered completely. This is a direct order. Raise your weapon or face court-martial. Then court-martial me. The private stepped back, his rifle now pointed at the ground. Because I'm not shooting an American veteran and her dogs without knowing why. One by one, the other soldiers followed suit, weapons lowering, expressions shifting from hostile to confused. The careful machinery of the interrogator's operation grinding to a halt as the human beings inside it remembered who they were. The thin man stood alone now, surrounded by subordinates who no longer followed and opponents who no longer feared. His hand moved toward his jacket, toward what Elena suddenly knew was a concealed weapon. She moved faster than conscious thought. Years of training she couldn't consciously remember took over, her body flowing through a defensive sequence that ended with her hand locked around the interrogator's wrist, preventing him from drawing. "Don't," she said quietly. The man's eyes widened. "How did you—" "I don't know." Elena's grip tightened. "But my body remembers things my mind forgot. And right now, it's remembering that you're a threat." Rex growled, pressing against her leg in support. The other dogs had moved into an attack formation, teeth bared, waiting for a command that Elena desperately hoped she wouldn't have to give. "Stand down!" A new voice cut through the tension, authoritative, familiar, carrying the weight of genuine command. Colonel Harrison emerged from a vehicle that had arrived during the confrontation, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene. "Colonel," the interrogator started. "Saviet." Harrison strode forward, positioning himself beside Elena. "I received some very interesting communications this morning. It seems your authorization to conduct interrogation operations has been revoked. That's impossible. I have direct authority from people who are currently answering very uncomfortable questions about Operation Cerberus." Harrison's smile held no warmth. "Did you really think you could contain this forever? That the truth would stay buried just because you wanted it to?" The interrogator's face drained of color. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. What she knows, what she might remember, it could destabilize. The truth?" Harrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Yes, I imagine the truth would be very destabilizing to people who have built careers on lies, people who murdered American soldiers and blamed the enemy, people who erased a hero's identity to protect their own secrets." Elena listened to the exchange with growing understanding. Harrison knew, maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to recognize what she represented, what her survival meant for the people who had tried to bury her. "Colonel," the interrogator's voice had changed, becoming almost pleading. "You don't know what was at stake. The cargo we were protecting, the intelligence we recovered, it saved thousands of lives. Thousands. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. And who decides what the greater good requires?" Elena found herself speaking before she consciously chose to. "Who decides that 12 handlers and their dogs are acceptable losses? Who decides that a decorated soldier should lose her identity, her memories, her entire existence, just to keep a secret?" The interrogator turned to face her, and for the first time, Elena saw something human behind his professional mask. Something that might have been regret. "You were never supposed to survive," he said quietly. "The IED that destroyed the convoy, it was meant to eliminate everyone. Leave no witnesses, no loose ends." A pause. "But you did survive, badly injured, with traumatic brain damage that erased most of your memories. And suddenly we had a problem. Me. You. The one person who could contradict our official story. The one person who might eventually remember what really happened." He shook his head. "We could have killed you. It would have been easy. You were in a coma for weeks. But someone argued for a different approach. Someone who thought you might be useful someday." "Useful how?" Operation Cerberus wasn't just about that convoy. It was about a capability, a way of training military assets that went beyond anything we'd achieved before. Your dogs, Staff Sergeant. Your methods. The bond formation techniques you developed. The interrogator's voice took on an almost admiring quality. "We tried to replicate it after you were gone, spent millions, years of research, never came close." Elena thought of her dogs, the 12 animals who had recognized her across years and miles, who had refused to leave her side despite every command to the contrary. The bond she had built with them wasn't a technique that could be reduced to a manual. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be replicated because it was fundamentally about love. "So, you kept me alive," she said slowly, "in case you needed my expertise. In case we needed Phantom, yes." The interrogator spread his hands. "But you weren't supposed to remember. The psychological conditioning, the false identity, it was supposed to hold indefinitely. We didn't account for—" He gestured toward the dogs. "We didn't account for them." Rex pressed closer to Elena's leg, as if understanding he was being discussed. Shadow's tail wagged softly. Ghost made a sound that was almost like satisfaction. "They remembered," Elena said quietly. "Even when I couldn't. They kept the connection alive. And now here we are." The interrogator looked suddenly exhausted. his professional mask completely abandoned. With you starting to remember, and people asking questions, and the entire operation unraveling because 12 dogs refused to give up on their handler, silence fell across the checkpoint. The soldiers stood uncertain, weapons down, watching a drama they didn't fully understand. Collins and his team maintained their protective positions around Elena, ready for violence that seemed less likely with each passing moment. Harrison spoke first. What happens now depends on choices made in the next few minutes. We can continue down the path of cover-ups and containment, which will eventually fail and take everyone involved down with it. Or, he looked at Elena, we can start telling the truth. The truth will destroy careers, end administrations, possibly trigger international incidents. The interrogator's voice was flat. The cargo we were protecting, the intelligence that was worth killing for, it came from sources that certain allies would prefer remain secret. Exposing what happened at Kandahar means exposing them. Then expose them. Elena's voice carried unexpected strength. Whatever I was protecting 3 years ago, whatever was worth the lives of my unit, I'm done protecting it. I'm done being a weapon for people who use me and discard me when I become inconvenient. She turned to face the assembled group. Soldiers who had refused to follow orders, handlers who had risked their careers, a colonel who had chosen conscience over politics. I don't remember everything yet. Maybe I never will. But I remember enough to know that what happened to my unit wasn't an acceptable sacrifice. It was murder. And the people who ordered it should face justice. The interrogator was quiet for a long moment. You understand that going down this road means becoming a target, permanent. For the rest of your life, there will be people who want you silenced. He paused. And not all of them will be as restrained as I am. I've been a target since Kandahar. Elena's hand found Rex's head, drawing strength from the contact. The difference is, now I know I'm not alone. She looked at her dogs, at the soldiers who had chosen to stand down, at Collins, Burke, Torres, Diaz, people who had barely known her a week ago, but had risked everything to protect her. I have family, she said quietly. I have pack. And that's something your masters never understood. The bond that holds us together isn't something you can break with orders or threats or violence. It's stronger than all of that. Harrison nodded slowly. Then let's go make some history, Staff Sergeant. The convoy reformed, leaving the Washington interrogator and his uncertain soldiers behind. Elena sat in the back of the transport, surrounded by dogs who had never stopped believing in her, heading toward a future that was finally her own to choose. But even as she allowed herself to hope, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Operation Cerberus wasn't finished, and neither was she. Desik. The debriefing at Nevada lasted 3 weeks. Every day, Elena sat in secure conference rooms, answering questions from military investigators, intelligence analysts, and congressional oversight committees. She told them what she remembered, which grew more detailed with each passing day, and admitted what she couldn't. She described the training methods of Ghost Handler Unit 7, the bond formation techniques that had produced dogs unlike any the military had seen before. She walked them through fragmented memories of the Kandahar convoy, the ambush that came from behind, the desperate fight to protect cargo she still couldn't fully identify. Through it all, her dogs remained with her. Special accommodations were made, kennels converted to something more like a home, handlers trained in Elena's methods assigned to support her around the clock. Rex slept at the foot of her bed every night, his presence a constant reminder that whatever else she had lost, she hadn't lost everything. Collins visited when he could, bringing updates from the investigation and rumors from the wider military community. The story of Firebase Sentinel had spread. The mysterious woman and her impossible dogs, the confrontation at the checkpoint, the interrogator who had retreated in defeat. By the time the 3rd week ended, Elena had become something between a legend and a controversy. They're calling you the Ghost, Collins told her during one visit, the handler who came back from the dead. Elena smiled without humor. I never left. I was just lost for a while. Well, you're found now. And from what I hear, a lot of people are scrambling to figure out how to handle that. He leaned forward. The preliminary investigation results are coming out tomorrow. Harrison says it's going to be big. How big? Career-ending for at least a dozen senior officers. Possible criminal charges for the civilians involved in the cover-up. International implications that have the State Department losing sleep. Collins shook his head. You really kicked over a hornet's nest, Staff Sergeant. I didn't kick anything, I just survived. Sometimes surviving is the most radical act possible. The next morning, Elena was summoned to a final debriefing session. The room was different from the ones she'd been using. Larger, more formal, with flags and official seals that suggested serious governmental weight. Harrison was there, along with faces she didn't recognize but whose insignia identified them as very senior indeed. And at the head of the table, displayed on a secure video screen, was a face Elena did recognize. General Morrison. The man whose voice she had heard in fragmented memories, ordering operations she was only beginning to understand. The man who had supposedly authorized the final mission of Ghost Handler Unit 7. Staff Sergeant Reyes, the general's voice carried across thousands of miles of secure connection. I've been waiting a long time to have this conversation. Elena straightened in her chair, feeling Rex press against her leg beneath the table. General, 3 years ago, I made decisions that I've questioned every day since. Decisions about what secrets were worth keeping, what sacrifices were acceptable, what lies could be justified in service of a greater good. Morrison's weathered face showed every one of his years. I told myself it was necessary, that the intelligence we recovered from that convoy saved lives, which it did, that the methods we used were regrettable but unavoidable, which I believed. And now? Now, I'm an old man facing the end of his career, wondering if anything I accomplished was worth the price others paid. Morrison's eyes found hers through the screen. You paid more than anyone, Staff Sergeant. Your unit, your identity, your memory, everything that made you who you were. Not everything. Elena's hand found Rex's head beneath the table. Some things can't be taken. No, I'm learning that. Morrison was quiet for a moment. I wanted you to know, before the official statements and the investigations and the political theater, that I'm sorry. It's inadequate. It's probably meaningless. But for whatever it's worth, from the man who authorized the operation that destroyed your life, I'm sorry. Elena studied the face on the screen, searching for deception, for manipulation, for the calculated moves of a politician protecting his legacy. What she found instead was exhaustion, regret, and something that might have been genuine remorse. The convoy, she said slowly, the cargo we were protecting, what was it really? Morrison hesitated. That information is still classified. General, Harrison's voice cut in. Given what Staff Sergeant Reyes has sacrificed, I think she's earned some answers. A long pause, then Morrison nodded slowly. Intelligence assets, human intelligence. People who had been providing information about enemy operations for years, being extracted ahead of a major offensive that would have compromised them. He met Elena's eyes. 17 individuals, men and women, who had risked their lives to help us, being transported to safety. What happened to them? The ambush that killed your unit. It wasn't about silencing witnesses. Not originally. It was about preventing that extraction. Someone in our own chain of command had been compromised, was feeding information to the enemy. They arranged for the convoy to be hit, hoping to eliminate the assets and protect their own position. Elena's mind raced through the implications. But Ghost Handler Unit 7 wasn't supposed to be there. No. Your assignment was last minute, a security upgrade because of suspicious activity in the area. Your presence wasn't part of the original plan. Morrison's voice grew heavy. When the ambush came, your unit fought back. Held them off long enough for most of the assets to escape through secondary routes. But the attackers called for reinforcement. And that's when the decision was made to eliminate everyone. Blame the enemy. Bury the truth along with the bodies. Except I survived. Except you survived, Morrison nodded. And suddenly there was a witness. Someone who might eventually remember what really happened, that the initial attack was meant to look like enemy action, that our own people were involved, that the entire official narrative was a lie. So they erased me instead of killing me. They argued for elimination, some of them. But others pointed out that your training methods, the bond formation techniques, were irreplaceable, that someday we might need that capability again, and dead handlers couldn't teach. Morrison's laugh was bitter. They preserved you like a tool in storage, ready to be brought out when useful. Elena absorbed this in silence. The dogs around her, Rex, Shadow, Ghost, the 9 others who represented a legacy of love and training, seemed to sense her turmoil. They pressed closer, offering comfort in the only way they knew. "The people who made these decisions," she said finally, "the ones who ordered the ambush, who authorized the cover-up, who turned me into a weapon to be stored and forgotten, what happens to them? Some will face prosecution, others will negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony. A few will probably escape consequences entirely. They're too connected, too protected, too useful to other powerful interests." Morrison's expression was grim. "Justice is never as complete as we want it to be." "And you, General?" "I'm retiring, effective immediately." He smiled without warmth. "My resignation will be announced as health-related, which is technically true. The stress of recent revelations has not been kind to my cardiovascular system. I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends for decisions I can never fully undo." It wasn't enough. Elena knew it wasn't enough, that no amount of resignation or prosecution could restore what had been taken from her unit, from the families who had mourned heroes they were told died fighting enemies when the real enemy wore the same uniform. But it was something, a beginning, a crack in the wall of secrecy that had hidden the truth for 3 years. "The 17 assets," she said, "the people we were protecting, did they survive?" Morrison nodded slowly. 14 of them made it to safety, thanks to your unit's sacrifice. They've been living under new identities ever since, providing intelligence that has saved countless lives." He paused. "They know what Ghost Handler Unit 7 did for them. They've been waiting 3 years to say thank you." Elena thought of her handlers, 11 men and women who had died in that Afghan valley, fighting to protect people they had never met, following orders from commanders who had betrayed them. They would never receive the thanks they deserved, never know that their sacrifice had meaning, but she could carry their memory, could ensure that what they did wasn't forgotten, wasn't erased, wasn't buried under convenient lies and classified reports. "I want their names restored," she said. "My unit. The official record shows them as casualties of enemy action. I want the truth acknowledged, that they died fighting a betrayal, not an ambush. That they were heroes in a way the world has never been told." Morrison nodded. "It will be done." "And the dogs." Elena's voice softened. "The survivors from Ghost Handler Unit 7, Shadow, Ghost, Viper, and the second generation. They're my family, my pack. I want formal custody, whatever that means in military terms. I want the right to care for them for the rest of their lives." "Also done." Harrison spoke this time. "Already authorized. Those dogs are yours, Staff Sergeant." "They always were." Elena looked around the room, at the flags and seals and serious faces, at the machinery of government grinding slowly towards something that might resemble justice. Then she looked down at Rex, at his faithful eyes and graying muzzle, at the scar above his eye that she had earned through years of partnership. "Then we're finished here," she said quietly. "For now." She rose from the table, 12 dogs rising with her in a formation that would have taken months to train with any normal handler. They had never needed training. They had only needed her. As she walked toward the door, Morrison's voice stopped her. "Staff Sergeant," she turned. "Ghost Handler Unit 7's training methods. The bond formation techniques. They're still classified, but there's been discussion of reviving the program. Properly this time, with oversight and ethics and all the things we ignored before." Morrison's expression was complicated. "They'll need someone to lead it, someone who understands what we're really trying to create." Elena considered the offer, a chance to rebuild what had been destroyed, to train a new generation of handlers and dogs who would share the bond she had pioneered, to ensure that the legacy of her unit survived, not as a buried secret, but as something the military could be proud of. "I'll think about it," she said, and she walked out into the Nevada sunlight, surrounded by her pack, finally free to choose her own future. The base housing at Camp Reynolds was modest but comfortable, a small apartment converted to accommodate 1 woman and 12 dogs. Elena spent her first week of official freedom doing nothing more complicated than existing, walking the desert trails with her pack, watching sunsets paint the mountains gold and purple, sleeping without nightmares for the first time in years. Her memories continued to return, filling in gaps she hadn't known existed. Not just Kandahar, but everything before. The training programs, the operations, the relationships that had defined her life as Phantom. Some memories were painful, others were beautiful. All of them were hers. Torres visited on her 3rd day, bringing a bottle of wine and stories about the 47 people who had survived the Bravo convoy ambush 3 years ago. "We have a reunion every August," he told her, his scarred face soft with emotion. The anniversary of the day we should have died. Every year, we raise a toast to Ghost Handler Unit 7, to the handlers and dogs who gave us a second chance. He paused. This year, we'd like you to be there. Elena accepted. It felt right. Joining the community of people whose lives she had apparently saved, whose gratitude she had never known she earned. Collins visited on her 5th day, bringing equipment requisition forms and a proposal for restructuring the military's K-9 training programs. You don't have to decide right away, he said. But the brass is serious about this. They want to do it right this time. Transparency, oversight, the whole thing. And they want you at the center of it. He smiled. Turns out the Ghost Handler Unit's methods weren't just better. They were revolutionary. The potential applications go beyond military work. Search and rescue, therapy, disability assistance. You could change how the entire world thinks about human-animal partnerships. Elena studied the forms, thinking about the magnitude of what was being offered. Not just a job, but a chance to shape the future, to ensure that the bond she had pioneered became something that helped people instead of being used as a weapon. I need more time, she said. Collins nodded, unsurprised. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. On the 7th day, she received an unexpected visitor. The man who arrived at her door was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray threading through dark hair and eyes that carried the weight of many years in dangerous places. He wore civilian clothes, but everything about his bearing screamed military, the straight spine, the economic movements, the constant awareness of surroundings. Staff Sergeant Reyes, he said, my name is Marcus Webb. I was the handler for Cerberus Team 2. Elena's breath caught. Ghost Handler Unit wasn't the only team. There were 3 teams originally. Unit 7, your unit, was the most successful. Unit 2 was disbanded after operational difficulties. Unit 3, he paused. Unit 3 was classified beyond anything I had clearance for. I don't know what happened to them. Why are you here? Webb reached into his jacket and produced a challenge coin. Old, worn, bearing a symbol Elena recognized from her fragmented memories. 3 dog heads arranged in a triangle, the mark of Operation Cerberus. I'm here because the operation isn't finished, he said quietly, and because there are things happening that you need to know about. Elena invited him inside. The dogs arranged themselves in their usual protective formation, watching the stranger with wary attention. Rex positioned himself at Elena's side, ready to defend against any threat. Operation Cerberus was never just about the convoy, Webb explained, settling onto the apartment's small couch. The intelligence extraction, that was the official mission, but the real purpose was something else entirely. What? The bond, the connection you created between handlers and dogs. It was being studied, not just as a training method, but as a model, a template. Webb's expression grew troubled. There are people who believe that the same techniques could be applied to other relationships, other forms of loyalty, other kinds of control. Elena felt ice form in her stomach. You're talking about using my methods on humans. I'm talking about the natural evolution of any successful program. Someone develops a technique for building unbreakable loyalty, and immediately others start wondering how it could be scaled, applied to soldiers, to populations, to anyone who might be useful to someone with enough power and enough moral flexibility. That's not possible. The bond I built with my dogs, it's not a technique, it's a relationship. You can't reduce it to a formula and apply it to humans. Can't you? Webb leaned forward. Think about what you actually did, Staff Sergeant. You created devotion so absolute that 12 dogs refused direct orders from their handlers, handlers they had known for years, because they sensed you were nearby. You built loyalty that survived death, memory loss, years of separation. He paused. Some people would pay a great deal to understand how you did that, and some people would do terrible things to acquire that understanding. The implication hung in the air between them. That's why they kept me alive, Elena said slowly. Not just because my training methods were valuable, because they wanted to study the bond itself, to figure out how to replicate it. And why you were given a false identity instead of being killed. A dead handler is just a collection of techniques in a file. A living handler, especially one with memory loss, is a laboratory, a subject who can be observed, tested, potentially reactivated when needed. Elena thought of her 3 years as Elena Martinez, the jobs she had drifted through, the cities she had visited, the vague sense of being watched that she had always attributed to paranoia. I was being monitored, constantly, by people who were trying to understand how the bond functioned, even when the conscious memory was gone. How your dogs could still recognize you, how the connection persisted despite everything that had been done to sever it. Webb's expression was grim. They learned a great deal from watching you, Staff Sergeant, and now they're ready to apply those lessons. Who is they? Webb was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember a man named Dr. Harrison Cole? The name triggered something, a flash of memory, fragmentary but vivid. A laboratory, medical equipment, a voice explaining procedures in calm, clinical tones. He was part of my treatment, Elena said slowly. After Kandahar, after I woke up in the hospital, he was one of the doctors who helped establish my false identity. He was much more than that. Cole was the architect of Operation Cerberus from the beginning, the one who recognized the potential of your training methods, the one who argued for keeping you alive when others wanted you eliminated. Webb paused. And the one who has been building something new for the past 3 years, something that uses everything he learned from studying you. What kind of something? I don't know the details. My clearance was revoked when I started asking questions. But I know this. Whatever Cole is planning, it requires subjects who have been prepared, conditioned, made ready to receive the kind of bond programming you pioneered. Elena felt sick. The thought that her life's work, the bond she had built through love and patience and genuine connection, could be corrupted into a tool for controlling human beings was almost too horrible to process. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only one who can stop it. Webb stood, moving toward the door. Whatever Cole has created, it's based on your methods, your understanding of bond formation, your intuitive grasp of how loyalty works at the deepest level. He turned to face her. You built something beautiful, Staff Sergeant, something that represented the best of what humans and animals can achieve together. Are you going to let someone turn it into a weapon? After Webb left, Elena sat in silence for a long time. Rex lay at her feet, his head on her knee, his eyes watching her with the patient devotion that had survived death, distance, and 3 years of forgetting. Around the room, 11 other dogs rested in their various positions, standing guard, sleeping peacefully, simply existing in the presence of the handler they had never stopped loving. She thought about what she had built, the bond that connected her to these animals at a level deeper than words or training could explain, the love that had survived everything. Explosion, amnesia, years of separation, the deliberate attempt to erase her existence. She thought about what others wanted to do with that bond, the corruption of something beautiful into something terrible, the transformation of love into control, devotion into slavery, connection into chains. And she thought about what she was going to do about it. The phone rang. Elena picked it up, unsurprised to hear a voice she didn't recognize. Staff Sergeant Reyes? The voice was calm, measured, carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Or, should I say phantom? I understand you've been asking questions about Operation Cerberus. Who is this? Someone who has been waiting a long time to speak with you. A pause. My name is Harrison Cole, and I believe we have unfinished business. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. Around her, the dogs sensed her tension, rising from their resting positions to form the protective formation that had become so familiar. The operation at Kandahar, she said carefully, the convoy, the ambush, the 3 years I spent as someone else, that was your work. Partly, I was responsible for preserving you when others wanted you eliminated, for maintaining your identity as Elena Martinez, for ensuring you remained available. Cole's voice carried no shame, no hesitation. I knew you would be needed again eventually. I just didn't expect you to find your way back so dramatically. What do you want? What I've always wanted, Staff Sergeant, to understand, to replicate, to apply what you discovered to purposes beyond your original vision. A slight smile colored his voice. You created something extraordinary with those dogs, something that defied everything we thought we knew about conditioning and loyalty. I've spent 3 years trying to understand how you did it, and now I believe I'm close to succeeding. You can't replicate it, Elena said flatly. What I built with my dogs isn't a technique, it's a relationship. You can't manufacture love. Can I? Love is chemistry, Staff Sergeant. Neurological patterns, hormonal responses, all of which can be influenced, enhanced, even created from scratch with the right tools. Cole's confidence was unshakable. I've been watching you for 3 years, studying how the bond persisted despite your memory loss, learning from every interaction between you and those animals, and I've made progress you can't imagine. Then why are you calling me? Because progress isn't the same as completion. I can create the chemical foundation of loyalty. I can condition subjects to respond with devotion. But there's something missing, something that makes your bonds different from anything I can manufacture. He paused. The dogs who defied their handlers at Firebase Sentinel, the way they recognized you despite years of separation. That's not chemistry. That's something else, something I need to understand. And you think I'll help you? I think you'll want to see what I've built, to understand how your work has been evolved. Cole's voice dropped slightly. And I think when you see the potential applications, you'll recognize that what I'm doing could change the world, end wars, unite communities, create connections between people that were never possible before, by turning love into a tool of control, by understanding love well enough to give it to everyone. Cole's conviction was evident. You built something beautiful with your dog, Staff Sergeant. Imagine if that connection could be extended to humans. Imagine communities where everyone felt the same bond with each other that you feel with your pack. No conflict, no isolation, no loneliness, just belonging. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what was being offered. A twisted version of her life's work, a corruption of everything she believed in, dressed up as utopia. Where are you? Somewhere you'll find eventually, but not yet. Not until you've had time to consider what I'm offering. Cole's voice carried something that might have been respect. You're the key to this, Staff Sergeant. You always have been. Whatever I've created, you created first. Whatever I understand, you understand better. This doesn't have to be adversarial. And if I refuse, then I continue my work without your input. Less efficiently, perhaps, more imperfectly. But the project won't stop just because you disapprove. A pause. The question is whether you want to influence how it develops, or simply watch from the sidelines while others decide how your legacy will be used. Elena was silent for a long moment. I'm not going to help you turn love into slavery. Then perhaps you'll help me ensure it becomes something else, something better. Cole's voice softened. Think about it, Phantom. You have time. We both do. And when you're ready to understand what's really at stake, I'll be waiting. The line went dead. Elena sat motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind racing through the implications of everything she had just heard. Around her, 12 dogs waited in patient formation, ready to follow wherever she led. Rex lifted his head, catching her eye with an expression of absolute trust. Whatever happened next, that look said, they would face it together. Okay, Elena said quietly, to herself and to her pack. So, that's how it is. Cole thought he understood the bond, thought he could replicate it, control it, turn it into something that served his purposes. He was wrong. What Elena had built with her dogs wasn't a technique or a formula. It was love, messy, complicated, irrational, impossible to quantify. The kind of love that survived death and distance and years of forgetting. The kind of love that couldn't be manufactured because it arose from genuine connection, freely chosen, freely given. Cole wanted to understand that love. He was about to learn that some things can't be understood from the outside. They can only be experienced. And sometimes they fight back. Elena rose from her chair, 12 dogs rising with her, in perfect synchronization. Operation Cerberus wasn't finished. But neither was she. What an incredible journey. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with friends who love stories about unbreakable bonds and hidden heroes. Every interaction helps us create more content honoring those who serve in silence. And stay tuned until the very end, because what happens after the credits will change everything you thought you knew. Epilogue: 3 months later, Elena stood at the edge of a Nevada training field, watching the sunrise over mountains that had become as familiar as old friends. Behind her, the renovated Ghost Handler Academy sprawled across 200 acres of desert, kennels and training facilities, research buildings and living quarters, all dedicated to the work of rebuilding what had been destroyed. Rex sat at her right hand, grayer now but still sharp, still devoted. Shadow lay nearby, his scarred leg tucked beneath him. The younger dogs, the second generation who had never known the original unit but carried its legacy in their blood, ranged across the field in various training exercises. Collins approached from the main building, tablet in hand as always. Morning briefing, Staff Sergeant. The new handler cohort arrives today. 32 candidates from military programs worldwide. They understand what we're asking of them. They understand that this isn't standard K-9 training, that we're not teaching techniques, we're teaching relationships. He smiled. Some of them think they already know what that means. They'll learn. Elena nodded, watching the dogs move through their exercises with the fluid grace that came from genuine partnership rather than rigid obedience. Each handler worked with their animal as partners, equals, friends. The old methods, dominance, control, punishment, had no place here. Neither did Cole's corruption. She hadn't heard from him since that first call, but she knew he was out there, building his project, developing his twisted version of what she had pioneered. Sooner or later, their paths would cross again. When they did, she would be ready. "There's one more thing," Collins said, his expression shifting to something more complicated. "A message came through secure channels this morning. Anonymous, encrypted. Our people can't trace it." He handed her the tablet. The message was brief, just 7 words and a set of coordinates. Operation Cerberus Protocol, 3 activated. They're coming. Elena stared at the coordinates. A location she didn't recognize, in a country she couldn't immediately identify. But something about them felt familiar, like a melody she had heard long ago and almost forgotten. "Protocol 3, she murmured. "I don't remember a Protocol 3. "Neither does anyone else. It's not in any records we can access." Collins's voice dropped. "But whoever sent this knew about Ghost Handler Unit 7, knew about Operation Cerberus, knew about you, and they went to considerable trouble to make sure you got this message without anyone else intercepting it." Elena looked up from the tablet, her eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there, pieces of her past were still moving, still active, still waiting to be discovered. The question was whether she would find them first, or whether they would find her. Rex pressed against her leg, sensing her tension. She dropped her hand to his head, feeling the familiar comfort of that contact. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. "Staff Sergeant?" Collins was watching her carefully. "What do you want to do?" Elena considered the question. She could ignore the message. Focus on rebuilding the academy. Leave the past buried where it belonged. But the past, she had learned, never stayed buried. It just waited for the right moment to resurface. And 12 dogs who had waited 3 years to find their handler had taught her that some things were worth pursuing, no matter how long it took. "Start researching those coordinates," she said quietly. "Find out what's there. And Collins?" "Staff Sergeant?" "Start planning a field operation, just in case." Collins nodded, unsurprised. He had worked with her long enough to know that when Phantom decided to move, nothing stopped her, nothing except love. And love, as Elena had proven, was the most powerful force in existence. She turned back to the training field, watching her dogs work with their handlers, watching the bonds form, the trust build, the love grow. This was her legacy, not weapons or techniques or control, but connection. Genuine, freely chosen, impossible to break. Whatever Cole was building, it couldn't compete with that. Whatever was waiting at those coordinates, she would face it with her pack at her side. And whatever remained of Operation Cerberus, she would find it. The ghost had come back from the dead, and she had unfinished business. The end. This story reminds us of a truth we often forget in our busy, disconnected world. Loyalty cannot be manufactured, and love cannot be programmed. In an age where algorithms predict our behavior and systems try to reduce human connection to data points, Elena and her 12 dogs stand as living proof that the deepest bonds transcend science, survive trauma, and outlast even death itself. The military tried to erase Phantom. They stole her memories, buried her identity, and scattered her family across continents. But they made one critical miscalculation. They underestimated the power of love. 12 dogs remembered their mother when she could not remember herself. They waited 3 years without wavering. And when the moment came, they chose her over every command, every handler, every order given. The lesson is simple but profound. Real loyalty is not built through control or manipulation. It is earned through genuine care, consistent presence, and unconditional acceptance. Whether between humans and animals, soldiers and comrades, or families and friends, the bonds that matter cannot be forced. They must be freely given and freely received. So, we ask you today, who are the loyal ones in your life? Who has waited for you during your darkest seasons? Who remembers you even when you forget yourself? Do not take them for granted. Pick up the phone, send that message, visit that friend. Tell someone you love them before life steals the chance. Because in the end, we are not measured by our ranks, our achievements, or our secrets. We are measured by who refuses to leave us behind.